It's about that time. Grossi Posse Packer Nation. Welcome to an episode of Podcast, the podcast where you don't have to be a Packers fan, but it sure does help. I'm your host, Tom. The playoffs are near. Grossi. And today, what we're going to be doing is going through the NFC and AFC, taking a look at the contenders to make the postseason. I know there's already been some teams that have clinched their spot, but we're going to look through each of their schedules, take a look at what I think the seedings could be as we get closer and closer to the playoffs.
Playoffs?
And also a huge shout out to YouTube and the NFL for allowing me to use some highlights in this video. And with that being said, let's get started. Starting off with the NFC, you got three teams that have already punched their ticket into the postseason, being the Lions, the Eagles, and the Minnesota Vikings. All three of these teams having a record of 12-2. Taking a look at the Lions, of course, they have been phenomenal this year, though they are decimated by injuries. The Eagles, they are on a huge winning streak. They are looking like the most balanced team in football. And the Minnesota Vikings, talking about expectations being superseded, holy crap, they're playing really damn well, though I hope every day for their downfall and failure. But that's neither here nor there. So taking a look at the rest of the Lions' schedule, sitting at 12-2, they got 3 games left, 2 against division rivals. They got the Bears, the 49ers, and the Vikings. And while David Montgomery got some potential good news this week that maybe he could return for the postseason, we are not going to see him before Wild Card weekend. And so going up against 2 division rivals, obviously there are going to be some tough matchups here. However, I see them winning at least 2 out of their 3 games. So I think they're going to beat the Bears. I think they're going to beat the 49ers. And the Vikings is the only game that I'm a little weary about. The Vikings and the Lions, the last time that they played, they went toe-to-toe. The Vikings almost winning that game. And here, I would not be surprised if the Vikings were able to get that win in Week 18 and potentially knock down the Lions. And who knows, maybe even get the division. But if this record plays out the way I think it's going to be, the Lions would finish with a 14-3 record, which is still phenomenal. Maybe they get some players back for the postseason, but overall, the Lions are trying to hold on to not only that number 1 seed, but also the NFC North, which may come down to Week 18. But here, I had the Lions finishing at 14-3. Taking a look at the next team, the Philadelphia Eagles, who are currently 12-2. They got 3 divisional games left, which is a pretty tough way to end the season. The good news is their division is awful. Their really only tough game is going to be against the Washington Commanders. Following that, they got the Cowboys and the Giants. I think there's a really good chance not only do they win 2 out of their next 3 games, but I think they have a great chance to win all 3 games. I think the toughest game left on their schedule is this weekend against the Commanders. With a win, they would clinch the NFC East. And even though the Commanders and Eagles usually go toe-to-toe, I think the Eagles have just been playing some really damn good football. And so for me, I think they're going to win out the rest of their schedule, giving them a 15-2 record. And we'll take a look at the standings here in a bit. I think the Eagles have a real good chance of clinching that number 1 seed. And then finally, of the teams that have already clinched a spot, you got the purple incarnation of Satan. You got the Minnesota Vikings. The Vikings, they do not have the easiest remaining schedule. They got to go up against Seattle, Green Bay, and of course, Detroit to end the season. And here, I could really see the Vikings losing 2 out of their next 3 games. I think there's a good chance they win against Seattle. Geno Smith should be back on Sunday, which will definitely help, but that offensive line is a little bit shaky. The Packers were able to get after Geno and Sam Howell, and the Vikings defense has been pretty damn good this year. However, I don't think that they're going to lose 2 out of their next 3. While it is possible, I see them most likely losing at least 1 of those games. Talking about the Packers or the Lions, if they're able to knock off the Seahawks, I think that date with the Packers is going to be really difficult. 1, because both of our teams usually split, and 2, the Packers are playing really damn well right now. So if the Vikings lose against either the Packers or the Lions, they would finish with a 14-3 record, tying them with Detroit with a pretty damn good record heading into the playoffs. And after that, the rest are all NFC contenders who have yet to clinch a playoff spot. You got the Green Bay Packers, you got the Buccaneers, the Rams, the Commanders, the Seahawks, and the Cardinals. And starting off, because why not, with the Green Bay mother-loving Packers. They're currently sitting at 10-4, and their remaining schedule is pretty damn favorable. They got to go up against the Saints, they got the Vikings, and then they got the Chicago Bears. The last 2 out of their 3 games are at home, and I think they have a really great shot of at least least winning 2 out of those 3 games, finishing them with at least 12 wins. If they beat the Saints on Monday Night Football, they will clinch a playoff spot, which is phenomenal. And I do think, as I mentioned before, that they can knock off the Minnesota Vikings. I think it's going to be the toughest game remaining in the regular season for them. But those teams, they do usually split. The Packers are playing very, very well. If Jair Alexander comes back for that game, I like their chances. So I think there's a really good shot the Packers wind up finishing 13-4, winning out for the rest of the year. They'd be 1 game behind the Lions and the Vikings with these predictions. They wouldn't be able to win the division or get a higher seed. But even getting into the 6th seed, getting into the postseason, that's all that's needed. And from there, let's see if some magic happens. Then following that, you got the 8-6 Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Their remaining schedule, very favorable. They got the Dallas Cowboys, the Carolina Panthers, and the New Orleans Saints in front of them. And the Buccaneers, they have everything in front of them that they want to win the NFC South. The Saints, they're not doing so well. The Falcons, they're starting a rookie quarterback against the Giants this weekend, and the Panthers, I picked them to beat the Cowboys and they didn't, so now I'm mad at them. I think there's a really good shot that the Buccaneers wind up winning out for the rest of their schedule. I think the Panthers are actually the hardest team left based on their remaining opponents because the Panthers and the Buccaneers went toe-to-toe, went into overtime the last time they played, but I feel pretty damn confident. Baker Mayfield is playing well, they're running the ball well, so I think the Buccaneers will finish with an 11-6 record, clinch the NFC South, and from there, let's see if Baker can keep on baking up some wins. Then you got the 8-6 LA Rams, who are currently sitting atop the NFC West. They got the Jets, the Cardinals, and the Seahawks remaining, 2 out of those 3 being really important divisional matchups. I think they should be able to knock off the Jets this weekend. The Jets, while they did have a win over the Jaguars, I don't think are a very good football team. Then they got the Cardinals and the Seahawks. The Rams were able to beat the Cardinals earlier this season, and of course the Rams have a win over the Seahawks as well. And the last time the Seahawks and Rams played, that game went into overtime, and I think that even though the Seahawks right now are not looking the greatest, that is going to be a real fun game and could be flexed into Sunday Night Football and that Week 18 spot. But here, I actually have the Rams winning out as well. I think they should be able to beat the Cardinals. The Cardinals just haven't really looked the same after the bye, and while McBride and James Conner are doing phenomenally well, I don't think the Cardinals are going to do enough to win that division. And same thing with the Seahawks. I don't think the Seahawks are going to win enough games to really be able to contend and win that division against the Rams. So because of that, I have the Rams finishing at 11-6, clinching the NFC West and punching their ticket into the postseason. Then from there, you're going to have 3 teams vying for a potential 7th seed. You got the Commanders, who are sitting at 9-5, the Seahawks at 8-6, and the Cardinals, they're the outliers, sitting at 7-7. For the Commanders, their final games are against the Eagles, the Falcons, and the Cowboys. Of course, we talked about that Eagles game. I think the Commanders will likely lose that game, though if they win, that could definitely shake up the seeding within the NFC. But they got the Falcons and the Cowboys, which I think are 2 very winnable games. Yes, they lost against the Cowboys earlier this season, but if Jaden Daniels can continue to play well and it's going up against Cooper Rush, I think the Commanders will have that. So because of that, I have them winning 2 out of their next 3, finishing at 11-6. And as for the Seahawks, I have them losing their next 2 out of 3 against the Vikings and the Rams, but beating the Bears, finishing with a 9-8 record. And as for the Cardinals, I have them winning 2 out of their next 3, losing against the Rams, but beating the Panthers and the 49ers, also finishing with a 9-8 record. As for the Falcons, they currently have a 7-7 record. They just benched Kirk Cousins. We're going to see Michael Penix this Sunday against the Giants. And their schedule is not too bad. They got the Giants, they got the Commanders, and then they have the Panthers. I actually think that there's a good chance that they win 2 out of their next 3 games, both against the Giants and the Panthers, but I would be pretty shocked if the Commanders lost to the Falcons, unless Michael Penix is basically the second coming. So with all that being said, even if they won all 3 of their games and they went 10-7, which I have them finishing at 9-8, they would still be behind the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, how I predict them to finish at 11-6. And even though the Falcons do have a tiebreaker over the Buccaneers after sweeping them this year, I think the Buccaneers are still going to finish either a game or 2 ahead of them. And so because of that, I don't see Atlanta making the postseason this season. So if this plays out as predicted, your number 1 seed would go to the Philadelphia Eagles with a 15-2 record, followed by the Detroit Lions at 14-3, the Buccaneers at 11-6, the Rams at 11-6, the Vikings at 14-3, the Packers at 13-4, and number 7 would go the Commanders at 11-6. Now again, there are some things that could shake up the seeding here. For example, the Vikings lose against the Lions Lions and the Packers. The Packers would catapult up to the 5 seed and the Vikings would fall to the 6 seed. You also could have the Vikings winning out and contending for that number 1 overall seed. However, I think the Eagles are going to be a problem there, and if the Lions are able to hold on and win 2 out of their next 3 games, I think they should still be able to hold a record over the Vikings. I still think the Lions have a good shot at winning the NFC North. And so if it was to shake out like this, the Eagles would be on a bye. Your first matchup would be the Lions against the Commanders, the Buccaneers against the Packers, and the Rams against the Vikings. It would make for a very exciting wild card weekend. We just got 3 games left. Let's see if it shakes out this way. Then heading on over to the AFC, where you have 4 teams that have already clinched a playoff spot. You have the Chiefs, the Bills, the Steelers, and the Texans. Only one of those teams, the Houston Texans, clinching their division. They wrapped that up this past weekend against the Miami Dolphins, and I think the Texans are going to be locked in at that number 4 spot, which is a good news for Houston because they do not have an easy schedule left. Taking a look at the Texans, their final 3 games are against the Chiefs, the Ravens, and the Titans, which is oof, to say the least. They currently have a 9-5 record, and at this moment, I see them losing 2 out of their next 3 games. I think it's possible that maybe they're able to knock off the Ravens or the Chiefs, but I think that's going to be a tall task, including the Chiefs having Hollywood Brown for this week, which would definitely help out their offense. So because of that, I'm going to have the Texans finish with a 10-7 record. Their win, of course, coming against the Tennessee Titans. Again, still pretty damn good for CJ Stroud and company. I'm a little bit more down against the Texans, though their defense is looking pretty damn good. Their offense hasn't been able to have that productivity I thought they would, but I still think once they get into the postseason, they get into the dance, anything could happen, but I have them finishing with a 10-7 record. Then following that, let's talk about the Kansas City Chiefs, who have a 13-1 record, who I think did just enough magic BS to potentially get that number 1 seed. Their final schedule is not easy either. They got the Texans, they got the Steelers, and then they finish up with the Denver Broncos. The Broncos, they went toe-to-toe with them last time, and it came up to a blocked field goal. The Steelers are a really damn good football team. That should be a close one. And then, of course, you have the Texans, which I still think will be a very competitive game. Now, the good news for the Chiefs is that they don't even have to win out to secure that number 1 seed, because the Bills are the closest team next to them with an 11-3 record. So even though the Bills have a tiebreaker over the Chiefs for their win against them earlier this season, they still got to drop 2 more games, which I do not see happening. I think the Chiefs will be able to beat the Texans and get a win against the Steelers, though I think it will be close. And because of that, they might be sitting their starters week 18 against the Denver Broncos. And I do have the Broncos winning that game, whether it is because they're sitting starters or I think the Broncos did go toe-to-toe with the Chiefs earlier. Maybe they can sneak off a win there. But either way, at most, I see the Chiefs losing 1 more game here, finishing with a 15-2 record, which would be the best record in the AFC. We'll talk about standings in a little bit. But as of right now, Chiefs fans, I don't think you have much to worry about unless you lose on Saturday. Then you can start to panic a little bit. Then the team currently in second place, you got the Buffalo Bills with an 11-3 record. Their remaining games, oh boy, it should be a cakewalk. Even though it's against divisional opponents, they got the Patriots, the Jets, and then the Patriots again. Both of those teams not playing well this year. The Bills, they're playing extremely well. Yes, of course, they did lose to the LA Rams, but they were able to knock off the Lions this past week, and I don't think the Patriots or the Jets have the offense to really keep up with the Bills. So because of that, I have the Bills winning out, finishing with a 14-3 record, which would give them the number 2 seed in the AFC. And unfortunately, it wouldn't be enough to catch the Chiefs, but the Bills, they would have the 2nd seed, home field advantage until they had to play the Chiefs or whatever opponent winds up coming to Buffalo. And then finally, of the teams that have clinched a spot already, you got the Pittsburgh Steelers, who are currently sitting at 10-4. The Steelers dealing with some injuries right now. TJ Watt's a little bit banged up, but he will play against the Ravens. And of course, no George Pickens, but they do not have a walk in the park of a schedule left. They got the Ravens, the Chiefs, and the Bengals. So it's good news that the Steelers have already clinched their spot, because that would not be a guarantee given this gauntlet. Going up against the Ravens, I think that's a total coin flip and could go either way. The Chiefs, I think that's going to be a loss. And the Bengals, that could be real interesting. Here, I think they're going to win at least 1 out of their next 3 games. I think it is going to be against the Cincinnati Bengals. The Steelers have had their number for the past couple of games. And I know on predictions, I did predict the Steelers to beat the Ravens, but I think it's going to be a tough game, especially without George Pickens. The Steelers have had the Ravens number the past 8 out of 9 games, so that definitely favors the Steelers. But again, AFC North football is always unpredictable. So taking a look at their remaining schedule, I'm still going to go with my gut and say the Steelers beat the Ravens here. So I think they're going to win 2 out of their next 3 games. I think they're going to lose to the Chiefs, even though it could be a really close game, and they'll win against the Bengals and the Ravens. However, I could see things going south and they lose their next 2 out of the 3 games, and they won't be booted from the playoffs. I think it's very possible that the Ravens could swoop in and not only beat the Steelers this week, but if the Ravens finish with an 11-6 record after beating the Steelers and winning the rest of their games, they would actually win the AFC North and they would move ahead of the Steelers in the standings and seeding. So while I do think it is a possibility that that will occur, I'm going to go with the Steelers to win 2 out of their next 3 games, winning against the Ravens, winning against the Bengals, and losing to the Chiefs. And then starting off with the teams that are still contending, you got the Baltimore Ravens sitting at 9-5, a game back against the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Steelers also having a win over the Ravens. Their final schedule are against the Steelers, the Texans, and the Cleveland Browns. I talked about that Steelers game, which I think is going to be the toughest one on this schedule. The Texans, I think, should be a close game, but a winnable one for Baltimore. And then going up against the Cleveland Browns week 18, I think they should have no problems there. So I think the Ravens at minimum win the next 2 out of their 3 games, finishing with an 11-6 record, which would be tied with the Steelers, but the Steelers would have the tiebreaker over them. If the Steelers wind up losing an additional game against the Ravens would win that division and they would propel all the way up to the 3 seed in this scenario. But as of right now, I'm having the Ravens lose against the Steelers, win their next 2 out of 3, finish 11-6, and from there, let's see what damage they can do in the playoffs. Then, following that, you got the LA Chargers, who had a big-time win over the Denver Broncos last night, which definitely shook some things up. The Chargers, as of right now, have not clinched a playoff spot, but are sitting with a 9-6 record. And the rest of their schedule, very fortunate. They only got 2 games left, and it's against the Patriots and against the Raiders, who are one of the worst teams in football right now. So I think that the Chargers are not going to have any problem making the postseason. I think they win these last 2 games. I think what's going to determine how far they go in the postseason is if J.K. Dobbins comes back before the playoffs. But here I have them winning out, finishing with an 11-6 record. And for the Chargers, their first year under Harbaugh, it's been a damn good one. Following that, you got the team that they just beat, the Denver frackin' Broncos. The Broncos also sitting with a 9-6 record, and they got 2 games left, and they are not easy. They are going up against the Cincinnati Bengals and the Kansas City Chiefs, and there is a real chance that the Broncos wind up losing out and missing the playoffs altogether. And an even crazier scenario, if Denver winds up losing out and the Colts, Bengals, and Dolphins win out, it would be a 3-way tie for the 7th seed in the AFC, and the tiebreaker would actually go to the Indianapolis Colts because they have the best conference record. So the Broncos, they need to win a frackin' game. As I said earlier when we were going through the Chiefs schedule, I think there's a good chance that the Broncos wind up beating the Chiefs in week 18, whether that's because Carson Wentz is starting because the starters are being rested for the Chiefs, or if the Broncos are just playing the Chiefs pretty damn hard like they did earlier this season, they could be able to sneak away with a win. I think there's a pretty good chance they lose against the Bengals. I think that high-powered offense might be a little bit too much for that defense, which without Riley Moss has not been looking the greatest. But as of right now, I have the Broncos finishing with a 10-7 record. They are the team that I am most weary about. The NFC teams, I think it's just seeding that could potentially be incorrect here. But for the Broncos, I think there is a real chance that they don't make the playoffs. They just have to pray that they get a win over the Bengals, which would mean that they're already in, or that they're able to knock off the Chiefs, because otherwise, this might slip away from Denver's fingers, and Brandon Perna would not be a happy person. And then the last 3 teams that are still contending for the playoffs, you got the 6-8 Colts, Bengals, and Dolphins. Starting off with the Indianapolis Colts, their schedule is a cakewalk. They're going up against the Titans, the Giants, and the Jaguars, arguably 3 of the worst teams in the league. Now, the problem with the Colts is that they lost against the Broncos, which was their best chance of potentially getting into the postseason. But on top of that, the Chargers won, which means that the most likely way that the Colts get in is first, they got to win out, but they need a bunch of other teams to either win out or the Broncos to lose out for them to have a shot. I do think the Colts are going to win their remaining 3 games, finishing with a 9-8 record. I don't think it's going to be enough unless the craziness happens and the Bengals, the Dolphins, and the Colts win out while the Broncos lose out. Then the Colts could get that number 7 seed. But even with an easy remaining schedule, I think that loss against the Broncos is going to be a little bit too much to overcome, because I think there's a decent chance that the Broncos wind up winning, or even the Bengals sneak in before the Colts do. But as of right now, I got the Colts finishing at 9-8 and just missing the postseason. Then you got the Miami Dolphins, who have a pretty damn good chance of winning things out as well. They're going up against the 49ers, the Browns, and the Jets for their final 3 games. I think the 49ers are probably the toughest team remaining on that schedule. That could go either way, though the 49ers are going to be using Patrick Taylor, former Packers running back, who is their 5th string running back, and the 49ers, we know they haven't been playing very well. But if Miami is able to get a win, I could see them winning out the rest of their schedule as well. I think at most they lose 1 out of these next 3 games, but I have them also finishing with a 9-8 record. I think it's going to be tough for them to make the postseason. I think they've lost just too many games, and while their offense can be really exciting, Tua really did not have a good game last week. I think losing against the Texans is going to put them a little bit too far behind to make the postseason this year, and so December is sadness once again. And then finally, you got the kitty goes meow Cincinnati Bengals sitting at 6-8. They got the Cleveland Browns, the Denver Broncos, and the Pittsburgh Steelers remaining. And let me be very clear. I think there is a world where the Bengals could win out. And I swear, if we see the Colts get the 7 seed because of this craziness, honestly, I wouldn't even be surprised anymore. But the Bengals, I think they should be able to knock off Cleveland. I think they're going to be able to knock off Denver, and it's going to come down to that Pittsburgh game. If the Broncos lose out, and let's just say the Dolphins lose or the Colts wind up losing one of those games, the Bengals could sneak in. However, I think what it's going to come down to is that final Week 18. Unless the Steelers are resting starters, which I don't think they'll be doing, I think the Bengals will lose to the Steelers. I think if that defense is able to contain Joe Burrow and really shut down that offense, the Steelers should be able to get a win. And like I've said, the Steelers have kind of had the Bengals numbers over this past few games. So because of that, I have the Bengals finishing at 8-9, losing to the Steelers at the very end. And again, there's still some room for pandemonium and chaos, and they could still sneak into the postseason, especially if they win against the Steelers. But at the end of the day, I think it's too little too late. You should have won that game against New England Week 1. And unfortunately, Kitty won't go meow. And so if things finish as I predicted, the number 1 seed would be the Chiefs at 15-2, the Bills at 14-3, the Steelers at 12-5, the Texans at 10-7, the Ravens at 11-6, Chargers at 11-6, and Broncos at 10-7. Again, the biggest fluctuations I think could happen here would be the Ravens winning and potentially getting that number 3 seed over the Steelers, or the Broncos potentially missing the playoffs altogether, and maybe the Bengals or the Colts sneaking in at that 7 seed. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. Who do you think is going to be punching their ticket into the postseason? Folks, we only got 3 regular season games left. Buckle up. Things are about to get crazy. But let me know. You know, I saw me at TomGrossiComedy.com or Tom Grossi Comedy, all social media, see down below. A big shout out and thank you to all the YouTube and Patreon members for supporting this channel. And thank you so much for watching. We'll be doing an 11-hour fundraiser tomorrow, starting at 1 p.m. Eastern, all the way until midnight. I'll be streaming both games. We'll be having on some great guests from 8 p.m. Eastern to midnight. Tune in. We're going to try to raise $100,000 for charity, the Rainforest Action Network, which is a phenomenal organization, and I hope to see you there to do some chaotic good. But thank you so much for watching. I'm Tom Grossi, and as always, go Pack Go.